Welcome and good evening. My name is Samir Gandesha, and I'm the director of the Institute for Humanities, which is hosting our event this evening, which is going to be a discussion of UBI, Universal Basic Income, from within the context of the pandemic. It is the third of 5 pandemic talks that we have organized it. In fact, Derek O'Keefe, who will be moderating this evening, has curated and organized at the Institute. The next ones coming up are policing and surveillance, which will be May 5th, and then Future of the Left. I don't think we have a date for that set yet. Before I go any further, I should just like to also acknowledge that this event is taking place on the unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Something that's always really vital to mention, and not just as an act of genuflection, but as a reflection on the nature of ongoing settler colonialism, which of course frames so much of what we're discussing today in terms of the disproportionate effects of the pandemic on marginalized communities, particularly Indigenous communities. And we're also looking specifically at the question of policing and how Indigenous nations and Canadians of African heritage are particularly brutally policed in this country, and obviously south of the border. So it's something very important to keep in mind. The previous iterations or editions, let's say, of our pandemic talks being Just Recovery, which kicked us off. Then we had a very interesting discussion as well on public health, present and future. And now, of course, we're going to address UBI. So I'd like to now just turn it over to my friend Derek O'Keefe. Derek is a longtime activist based in Vancouver, was involved in the formation of Vancouver Tenants Union, an author and an editor with Ricochet Media. And again, I'd just like to acknowledge the hard work that Derek has put into organizing these COVID talks. So Derek, over to you. Take it away. You have the floor.
Thank you, Samir, and thank you to our panelists and all of the guests watching this evening. We were mentioning as people came in that we're all suffering Zoom fatigue at this point, and more importantly, I think in most of Canada, people are really struggling. In particular, the front line and the working classes of Canada are really struggling under this third wave of COVID. So just as introductory remarks and set the context for me, my state has been a challenging one the last 24 hours just because of COVID. I got my vaccine shot yesterday, immediately after they opened up the AstraZeneca vaccine in BC to folks just over 40, a little over 40. And so I'm a little wiped today. And then the workspace where I was supposed to go that I share with a cousin to do this event, to do the Zoom call this evening, he has COVID. So obviously I wasn't able to go there and had to do some audibles at the last minute. So all of that to say, if you hear a puppy or a 10-year-old in the background, I apologize, but we're doing our best. I'll do my best to moderate. But yeah, that's my context. I really, really wanted to thank both John Clarke and Floyd Marinescu for being our expert panelists to present the case for UBI, as well as the critique of UBI, and just sort of lead us in to a deeper conversation on these important issues. Floyd, in particular, is scrambling to join us at the last minute because we had Ben Earl from the Basic Income Canada Network had a family situation, or a family commitment rather, and had to swap out with Floyd about 24 hours ago. So we apologize for putting you on the spot, Floyd, and thank you for joining us. And a previous iteration of this event was to feature MP Leah Gazan of Winnipeg Centre, an NDP member of Parliament who is currently sponsoring a private member's bill for a universal basic income in Canada. She as well was not able to, at the last minute, had to reschedule because of commitments in her riding in March. So we're all struggling with busy schedules, and thanks everybody for taking this time tonight. Quickly, the format will be very little of me talking. We will have 15 minutes opening presentations by our two speakers, and then we will have, I will sort of kick off the Q&A with some moderator-led questions to both John and Floyd, and then we should have about 30 minutes for audience questions. And again, put those questions as you think of them in the Q&A, not the regular chat, but the Q&A. Just click on the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen is what I'm trying to say. So quickly, I'll introduce our two speakers, and then we'll go right to this discussion of the universal basic income. And of course, this has sort of reemerged as an important and timely discussion because of the pandemic, in particular last year's experience with the Canadian Economic Recovery Benefit, or CERB, has sort of put this front and center. And possibly we'll get into it, but change the terms of the debate in many ways. The measures are being considered by the Liberal government, although you always take that with a grain of salt. And in cities and jurisdictions, some countries as well, pilot programs around a universal basic income are being implemented. The most recent was just announced today by Los Angeles City Council. They will be doing a pilot UBI program for, I think, 2,000 families in Los Angeles. So joining us to hash this issue out, we have Floyd Marinescu. I hope I'm saying that something close to correct, because we've just met. He is the CEO and co-founder of C4 Media, which provides software development, news, and learning events serving 1.2 million people online at infoq.com. And also organizes 8,000 attendees annually via QCon conferences in San Francisco, New York, London, Beijing, Shanghai, and Sao Paulo. Floyd is also an angel investor in over a dozen startup companies and has built teams and businesses in the US, Canada, China, Brazil, Europe. So it really has a global business perspective. And Floyd describes himself as a CEO activist for basic income. And then following Floyd, we will have John Clarke, who is a longtime anti-poverty activist in Canada and Ontario in particular. He became active in anti-poverty struggles in the 1980s when he lived in London, Ontario. And then he was an organizer for 28 years with OCAP. Many of you will have heard of their important work, the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty. And John is currently the Packer Visitor in Social Justice at Toronto's York University, lecturing at York. So thank you, Floyd and John, and we will give the floor to Floyd first for about 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay.
Yes, loud and clear.
So I apologize if I'm a bit tired. It is almost 8 p.m. here. And also I wasn't quite aware this was going to be a kind of a two sides debate, but let's bring it on. That should be fun. And may as well start this swinging. First of all, I don't claim to have anywhere close to Mr. Clarke's experience in the anti-poverty movement. I come at this from a perspective of how our economic system is structurally changing, diminishing the middle class, putting more people into poverty, including working people, putting more millennials into a terrible situation in terms of their ability to get a good income or ever grow their wealth. So, and also coming out from an automation technology angle. So I'm sure Mr. Clarke comes from a different perspective from perhaps what's the best way to address poverty and help those who need it most. These are very different perspectives. If I could simplify the differences in a simple sentence, I was very inspired. I saw a video by the late Robin Williams recently, where he was testifying to the US Senate next to Whoopi Goldberg in the 80s. And he said, we have to stop picking people up when they're down and make it so that they don't fall into poverty in the first place. And I think that's the fundamental difference between the basic income movement and the movement of people who believe in doubling down on the existing social assistance system. In one case, we're talking about ensuring that all Canadians have the ability to plan, have security long-term, can make long-term decisions based on it. And on the other camp, the view is more from when people are already in poverty, how can we most efficiently and most best way help them to get out of it. These are very different perspectives, almost different problems that are being discussed. So I just want to frame that first from that point of view. So the title of this panel and talk was Economic Recovery. Is it time for a basic income? So I didn't come here to talk about poverty. I came here to talk about economic recovery and why basic income, I think, is a key policy platform to achieve that better. So if you look at all the previous economic crises we've been in, one of the consistent themes is that most people have been worse off after the recovery. We didn't even finish the last recovery since 2008. Where the bottom half of Canadians are worse off than they were before 2008, have less wealth, lower incomes. So we see basic income as key to a fairer and faster economic recovery, one in which everyone's better off. One of it is inclusive, where low-income workers are taking a bigger share of the economic pie, where we've seen for decades the share of income that goes to the 1% has been increasing, while the share of income going to the bottom 60% is decreasing. Something's got to give. Young people today don't have a lot of hope that things will get better when their incomes are being squeezed. And there's a phenomenon I use to kind of simplify the economic trends that we're looking at here. I call it the big squeeze. People's incomes, their quality of life, their disposable income is being squeezed on two sides. On one side, you have automation, melting paychecks, displacing jobs, displacing wages, causing an excess in labor supply that is causing depression and wage growth. In many cases, causing sudden drops in wages as people's jobs are literally displaced by technology. This happened to millions of people in the early 2000s in the manufacturing sector, as is happening now in a variety of industries in Canada. That's a real thing. And if there's one thing people should understand about the impact of technology and automation, it's not a future of no jobs. It's a future where most of the jobs being created are lower income and lower quality. And this is something that economists have already been showing, that a lot of the new jobs, a majority of new jobs being projected to be created, you could broadly call wealth services. These are low quality, low income, often gig economy jobs that don't have benefits, are low pay, and don't have a ladder up into the middle class. There's no one is projecting the creation through market forces of a lot of middle income jobs. Like, I've never heard of one. There are no trends on the horizon that will grow the middle class. Basic income to me seems one of the only policies on the table to grow people's incomes in the bottom half, allow people the ability to seek better work, to take time to retrain, help students stay in school longer without fear, help people leave the job market for a little bit to retrain, and able to come back in force with better work, which we've seen in several basic income pilots, people actually seeking better work because they have the income security to leave a poor paying job. It'll help entrepreneurs start businesses, take longer to work on their startup and their ideas. That's why Sam Altman from Y Combinator says that basic income is like seed funding for the people. And it'll help people who are in poverty now, as is the basis of the basic income movement, that it's better if you have money in an unconditional manner, rather than having all kinds of conditions and stigmas, and also financial disincentives to actually seek work when you're already in poverty, because you lose a lot of other benefits that you need. I started crying when I heard someone on ODSP tell me one time that they were on the Ontario Basic Income pilot, and when they had the money in an unconditional manner, she felt like she had freedom. She didn't have to report to anybody, didn't have to justify where she goes and what she does. She was able to actually seek some part-time work without fear of losing her benefits. Because if you have a disability that is more intermittent, it's a big risk for you to go get a job, because what if something happens to you, it comes up again on your job and you get fired? How long will it take you to get back on disability? It's quite risky. Basic income does away with all those disincentives. But I want to stress so much that basic income is about so much more than poverty. It's about helping people stay out of poverty. It's about the bottom 50% of income earners, because today Canadians are working harder and longer than the previous generation and getting less in return. Jobs don't pay like they used to. Wages are not rising faster than costs of living. You could say broadly that jobs aren't working for a lot of people as a way to share in the gains. Our economic growth and productivity growth has been disconnected from wage growth for generations. Middle class jobs are disappearing, and we have a growing share of jobs that are low income. Benjamin Tal from CIBC has has said that the trajectory of new job creation in this country is all down, 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 just lower quality, lower income. While we are seeing a growing share of high income jobs, but that's coming at the expense of the middle class with a much larger share of low income jobs. That's a messed up economy. We should be moving up into the middle like it's happening in China. So what hope do we have when the middle class is shrinking and life is getting harder for the bottom half? And a key reason for this is technology is cheaper than workers. A whole bunch of things in increasing categories of work. With 42% of the tasks that Canadians do at work today can be automated with existing technologies. And now that we're in the pandemic, a lot of businesses, just like in previous major recessions, were forced to automate to survive, so they can do more with less and just keep up. We saw that in the early 2000s when China entered global supply chains. It created a sudden loss of income for North American parts manufacturers, including my father and uncle were a manufacturer in the auto manufacturing industry in Ontario. And what we saw was a lot of those businesses, we saw 5 million jobs lost in manufacturing, of which 4 million of those 5 were attributed to automation, not to global trade. So China coming into the market simulated what's happening with the pandemic now, a sudden loss of income, and businesses had to automate to stay competitive. And I'm quite concerned because I think it's been said that millions of jobs won't come back as we recover from the pandemic. And in fact, we're going through a rapid structural change where all of us are becoming addicted to Amazon. Main Street retail won't recover. And we're seeing a lot of companies who had wanted to automate, but were worried about all the downsizing they have to do and all the publicity. They had free hands to now fire huge amounts of their staff and replace them with technology and not hire them back. And so we're going to see a huge shift in the labor market once this thing starts to get recorded, probably about a year from now. So technology overall is capturing a greater share of the actual money that used to go to labor. And you can see it in all the statistics. For decades, the share of income that's going to capital has been increasing, while the share of income going to labor, to working people, has been decreasing. It didn't used to be that way. You know, before the invention of computers in the late 60s, but before the first recession in 73, where companies like, as I said before, could automate and become more productive while mainframe computers were in full, were mainstream adopted at that point, and robotics were coming into play. Up until then, the share of income going to labor was increasing, and share of income in the capital, as worse to the 1%, was decreasing. And some might say, well, oh, that's because unions went down and Milton Friedman screwed up everything. But the fact is, technology was also, since computers and the adoption of robotics were happening around the same time. And Andy Stern from the SEIU, one of the largest labor unions in the United States, he wrote a book on basic income. He was saying that unions have lost leverage to automation and to globalization. What can you say when your workers are effectively under threat of automation or of rapid replacement with foreign workers overseas? Which I say globalization is also a factor of technology and automation. It's only because we have the internet and we have global supply chains and instant and free communications that globalization could even happen. No amount of tariffs could have prevented that. Just go on Upwork right now and search for any gig you want. And I challenge you why you'd pick a Canadian when someone in Eastern Europe costs 3 times less for the same work. Now through the pandemic, we're all learning how to go remote. That's going to dramatically accelerate globalization, at least of knowledge-enabled internet jobs, as more and more businesses realize that there's no difference between hiring local or hiring in South America or Eastern Europe or anywhere. If the job is behind a Zoom window, it makes absolutely no difference. And even before the pandemic, I knew a lot of solopreneurs, even single small businesses were hiring virtual assistants in the Philippines at $5 an hour. So what's going to happen now that the rest of the world is woken up and can see that it's really easy to do global hiring through the internet? So this all means lower wages for Canadians because how are we going to compete with billions of new people coming online for jobs who cost 3 times less than we do? So I think we need to embrace basic income. It's the way that we can transition through this. It's the way that people here who are disadvantaged in lower income and lower quality jobs can retrain and pursue better work. It's the way that you could see it from the lens of shared prosperity, as getting a share of the economy, as Andrew Yang used to say, so we can all benefit from from the income that comes from technology and automation, from economic growth, reconnecting economic growth to basic income. And broadly speaking, there are two kinds of basic incomes that tend to get spoken of. There's the universal dividend, which you could see it as giving us all a share of the economy. We all have an equal share in our growth. And then there's the guaranteed minimum income, which tapers off as earned income grows, which is practically speaking the most common model discussed in Canada right now and discussed by MPs who are supportive of basic income. And I see a guaranteed minimum income as buying us time. It buys you time to pursue better work, to invest in yourself, to make long-term plans. And time is of essence. That's why Benjamin Tal from CIBC, a deputy chief economist, he says basic income must be the first thing, the first policy in a broader solution to rising wealth inequality. People need time. They need time to survive. And I don't think we should wait until they fall into social assistance for them to get the help they need. I grew up in a house with domestic violence, and if a mom had a basic income, it would have changed things. She would have had probably more freedom, more respect, knowing that she had the ability to leave, that she could have made those plans. I'd much rather she would have had a basic income, so she could have had the security and confidence to stand up for herself and leave on her own terms, and have to flee at some point and call some hotline, and who knows what kind of help is on the other side that you don't even know or trust. So that's, again, a big difference between the social assistance approach to helping people in need versus basic income. Basic income lets you plan and avoid falling into poverty in the first place, versus other social assistance systems where you have to get to a really bad place in your life before you even qualify. And then you have to spend all this time applying and all this time wasted going across town and trying to justify yourself to fit in for such a basic for the support you need. So Canadians can't wait. We need a basic income now. Yeah, sorry about my video, but you can hear me, that's good. 3 in 10 Canadians have no savings beyond 1 week. 8 in 10 have no savings beyond 3 months. And these were stats before the CERB was put out. Now with CERB, maybe it's slightly better, but not for long. Experts predict that 2 in 5 of the recent job losses could be permanent. 9 in 10 jobs lost in the last 3 recoveries were very easy to automate. In fact, since 2008, that recovery was called a jobless recovery because it took way longer than the previous one before that to reach pre-crisis employment levels. And I suspect this one will be the same because of, in part, all the automation that it's had. So I guess just to finish off my part, I also want to point out again, since the title of this talk is Basic Income and Economic Recovery, UBI Works commissioned a study by the Canadian Centre of Economics Analysis on what would be the potential economic impacts of basic income in Canada. It's probably one of the first studies of its kind in the whole world that looked at that, and they found that a basic income, depending on which model you're talking about, a $2,000 guaranteed minimum income, or a blended model that's $2,000 guaranteed minimum income on top of a $500 a month UBI dividend for all adults, could generate 300,000 to 600,000 jobs and $80 billion added to Canada's GDP. That's as much as the pre-COVID tourism and hospitality industries combined. So this report showed that basic income has an economic multiplier. It can actually grow the economy, and they showed that it would grow the economy by more than it costs. That's not something you can say about a lot of various government initiatives, that we could justify a basic income as an investment in people, an investment in economic growth, and an investment in our productivity. And a number of economists, when that report came out, said that this shows that basic income can enhance the economy's ability to grow, it can, thus enhancing our productivity and our quality of life for everyone. So what are we waiting for? A basic income that would reduce poverty in this country by 50% has been shown to have a net cost of just $35 billion. That's not a lot of money. On our website, on our 8 ways to pay for basic income, we put up a spreadsheet showing $1 trillion worth of funding ideas from a variety of tax research institutes. You can pick and choose whichever ones you want. It's very easy to come up with $35 billion. And in fact, the report from CanSIA showed that you don't even need to raise all 35 of net cost. You can just raise half of that, because the economic growth on its own with debt funding could be used. The economic growth it would create would increase government revenues, which could be used to down pay that half that was done through debt, with complete payback of the debt within 19 years. And even that was challenged, where someone said, well, why would you even have to pay it back? Because these days government is justifying all kinds of investments merely on the fact that you could pay for the interest charges on the investment. And by that definition, basic income might even be free when it comes to the net cost. So what the heck are we waiting for? We can have a fairer and faster economic recovery with the basic income. And that's the kind of country I like to live in, where young people have the ability to invest in their futures, to start new companies, to seek better work. And no, it's not modern monetary theory, but MMT even more so implicates that suggestion that we could consider this as an investment and even consider partial debt funding if necessary. So once again, I think the big difference between the basic income approach, at least in the context of poverty, is that we should stop people from falling into poverty in the first place, instead of picking them up when they're already in poverty. And that's a big difference in the lens I expect to be a difference between myself and Mr. Clarke. So thank you very much.
Floyd, thank you so much for that presentation. And people can consult the chat for some background links on some of the reports and websites that were mentioned. It looks like Jesse has put those there. And we're going to turn the floor over now to John Clarke.
So thank you very much. So yes, it's certainly true that we're going to approach this from the standpoint of some quite fundamentally different assumptions, and that's entirely fair comment. I'm going to, I think, I'm going to try and set out some of the basic considerations around basic income that I think have to be considered in evaluating the possibilities. And at the same time, however, I also want to deal with precisely what is so topical tonight, is the question of how the pandemic crisis. There is no doubt that in this present context, you have enormous numbers of people who are facing hardship and, even worse, facing considerable uncertainty. And there is no doubt whatsoever that there has been an enormous revival in interest in the idea of basic income. And could it be a solution? It is as yet untested, but there are certain assumptions that are put forward. And I want to begin by trying to, in a very basic way, challenge some of those assumptions. And the first thing I think we have to do before we even get to basic income is to ask ourselves, what is the actual function in this society, a capitalist society? What is the function of income support in general, whether it be social assistance, whether it be unemployment insurance, or whether it indeed be at some point basic income? And when you look at how historically income support systems arose in this society, they arose, and you can go all the way back to the English Poor Laws, they arose essentially as a reluctant concession. You have a situation where workers bid for jobs in the job market, and there's a certain number of people who are excluded by virtue of high rates of unemployment, by virtue of people's individual situations in their lives, disability sometimes, and so it was deemed necessary to provide a level of income support to people to prevent conditions of social dislocation, to prevent unrest. And that's how the first systems of income support, going all the way back to Elizabethan England, that's how income support actually emerges. And so the whole point in doing it was put forward by the English Poor Law Reform Commission of 1834, when they came up with their concept of less eligibility. And the basic idea was that enough income would be provided to keep people alive, but it certainly wouldn't be enough to ensure that people had some kind of alternative to the lowest paying jobs. That was essentially the thinking of the commission. And systems of income support have always largely been based on those considerations all the way through. And so during the post-war years, when wages are rising, income support systems generally become less restrictive, and they become more adequate. With the turn to the neoliberal approach in the 1970s, you then see a situation where income support programs are being degraded, and being degraded very systematically. The name of Milton Friedman comes up. Coming out of the Chicago School of Economics in the 1970s, there's a paper written not by Friedman, but by other economists there, where they argue essentially that unemployment levels at that time in the United States are higher than they've been since the Great Depression, and yet wages are not coming down. And so the argument they make is that curtailing those systems of income support, unemployment insurance and welfare, are going to be necessary in order to depress wages. And I think that strategy has been pursued, I must acknowledge, with incredible success during the neoliberal period. Income support systems have been degraded, and there has been an enormous growth of low-wage precarious work. I believe it's been pursued as a very conscious and deliberate strategy. I don't think it's just a natural result of robots. I think it actually is an attempt to restore higher levels of profitability and increase rates of exploitation, and the degrading of income support has been very, very important in doing that. Now, we now arrive at a situation where, after some 50 years of that agenda being pursued, you now have income support systems that are a shade of what they used to be. Social assistance rates, and I was involved in the Coalition Against Poverty for some 28 years, the adequacy of social assistance rates were driven down, unemployment insurance systems were gutted, and so it is suggested that basic income would provide a kind of a remedy. But the first thing that I think needs to be said is that the degrading of income support systems has been pursued as a conscious political strategy. The same vested interests that have profited from ensuring inadequate systems of income support as they exist at the moment are not going away. The assumption that basic income is this solution, by virtue of the fact that it has somewhat less conditionality attached to it and such like, that this is going to somehow magically transform it into an adequate system of income support, I think is inherently wrong. If tomorrow a system of income support were introduced, the same political pressures, the same forces that ensure that present systems of income support are inadequate would play out with regards to basic income. So the first thing I want to challenge is the assumption that it represents some sort of signal change in the adequacy of income support. It can do in terms of what somebody designs on a drawing board, but playing out in this society, I challenge the notion that income support is inherently adequate. I don't believe that that's true. And in fact, I think in terms of the regressive agenda that I've been talking about, income support, basic income actually, in some very definite ways, furthers that. I think that's precisely why Milton Friedman liked the idea so much. I think that's why half of the Silicon Valley billionaires buy into basic income. I think that's why Jeff Bezos really likes the idea, because it has certain advantages in terms of that regressive agenda. The first is that you are talking about extending the commodification of social provision to a huge degree. The pilot project that was carried out in Ontario, 70% of the people who were on it were not people taken from the social assistance roles. Primarily what they were testing was a wage top-up system for low-paid workers. And a wage top-up system for low-paid workers is essentially a subsidy to employers. And if you subsidize low-wage employers, then you remove the possibilities of fighting for increased wages. You remove the pressure on governments to increase minimum wages. You have settled for the notion that the income support the income that low-wage workers receive will come largely from the taxes that are paid by other somewhat better paid workers. That's where the money will basically come from. The UBI works reports that Floyd mentioned, they stress in there that the money should not come from increases in taxes on corporations. It should come from households, i.e. it should come from other working class people. So that's basically one of the major immediate problems in terms of cutting across the struggle for living and decent wages in this society. The second thing is, precisely because you are commodifying social provision so much in a context where there is a rampant agenda of austerity and privatization, then you arrive at exactly the situation that the right-wing US political scientist and supporter of basic income, Charles Murray, puts forward, is that basic income will be not something that augments existing systems of social provision, but something that replaces them. And so, again, good intentions and progressive ideas abound when it comes to basic income proposals. But how it would play out in the present context and what agenda it would serve, I think, is an entirely different question. I would also say that and I think the methodology of the UBI works report is extremely dubious. The same outfit that they used to put forward these ideas came up with all kinds of outlandish proposals when they were commissioned by a business group to explain why raising minimum wages in Ontario was a disaster. And they came up with all kinds of proposals about the job losses that would accrue and all the rest of it, which never happened. We are in a situation where in the post-pandemic period, there is going to be a real need to fight for very, very different things, to fight for something much better. And I believe for us, it would be a big mistake to put our resources into a struggle to extend the cash payment system. Certainly, we need to greatly improve unemployment insurance, which I refuse to call employment insurance. Absolutely adequate income for people presently on social assistance and especially people on disability benefits is of enormous importance. But to extend the cash payment as the main way of providing for social needs, I think, is a big mistake. For the same kind of outlay that could be put into basic income, so much more could be done in terms of free systems of public transport, real universal childcare, pharmacare, Dentacare, a huge increase in social housing provision so that the income that people have isn't a de facto subsidy to landlords. Those kinds of spendings, those kinds of allocations are the things that I think we should be fighting for. And above all else, I don't think we must be reconciled to a low wage economy with a bit of basic income perfume poured over it to kill the smell. I think we need to take up a fight for decent wages. I think we need to rejuvenate our trade unions. I think we need to challenge the assumption that the reordered workforce of global neoliberal reality is something that we have to be reconciled to. But for all of the reasons I've said, good intentions notwithstanding, and they abound, basic income, in my view, is a disastrous mistake that would serve the neoliberal agenda rather than reverse it. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, John and Floyd. I think that's a great, you've both given us really engaging presentations to kick off this discussion. I have a couple questions. I'll pose a question to John and then Floyd.
Do I get to respond to some of the things John said? The first grower's privilege?
I think the format will be, you can respond, I'll ask a question and then you can respond. I just have a question for John. Sure. And then for Floyd, and you can take up some of the points as well. And yeah, you're both free to do that. So just extend your response a little bit. John, I wanted to come to you first and suggest that take up more the question of what CERB, the experience of CERB showed us. And I guess I would ask you to explain the differences, for example, between the CERB that was extracted from the Liberal government under pressure, $2,000 a month for several months. Apologies for the background. And then versus, say, the context of the United States, where, you know, they were kicking and screaming to hand over $600 checks or $1,400 checks. You know, they couldn't even get the $2,000 one-time check. So I guess the question would be, is it really a matter of whether UBI is good or not, or isn't it a matter of the balance of forces politically in given jurisdictions as to, you know, the point is there's a big difference between a $2,000 CERB that extends, say it had extended through the whole pandemic, versus a one-time $2,000 check.
Yes.
Yeah. So is there any level, and a follow-up would be like, is there any level at which a UBI would serve the goals that sort of animate your political commitments?
Right. Well, thanks, Eric. That's an excellent question. The first thing that I think needs to be said is that that CERB needs to be understood as something that emerged in a particular context. It was certainly more adequate than that which was provided in the US. I don't believe it met the needs of many people in a whole series of ways. But for a significant period of time, you have a provision of $2,000 a month going to people. And I think that reflects something that was happening. You have a situation where this pandemic suddenly creates complete economic dislocation, and you have to shut down the economy. It isn't just that there's an economic crisis, that there's an actual need for an enforced shutdown on a very large scale. And in that situation, I think the government in Canada, to a lesser extent the United States, but it still happened to a degree there, and some of the European countries, etc., they introduced measures of social provision very temporarily at a level that they never would have anticipated. I mean, even Doug Ford here in Ontario at one point made the statement that if you have to choose between paying your rent and buying groceries, buy groceries. Now, I think it would have taken the Spanish Inquisition to get Doug Ford to make a statement like that in normal times. But under this extreme situation, there was a very temporary situation where a provision of income to people who had been artificially removed from the workplace was absolutely necessary, mainly to ensure that businesses could continue to function, and partly to ensure that there wasn't complete social dislocation. However, Trudeau went on a panel put forward by the Financial Times of London and acknowledged that certainly was not the model that his government was looking for, or the level his government was looking for with regards to income support in the period ahead. So I think it has to be understood as something that develops in a very particular situation. With regards to the other really intriguing element of what you put forward is the balance of forces will decide. Well, to a significant degree, that's true. The balance of forces in society will decide levels of income support and such like. I simply argue that basic income as something that extends the commodification of social provision is not the terrain to fight on. There is no question that if everybody suddenly received, paid for by the government, a level of income that was utterly adequate so that they could choose to engage with the job market or not, that would greatly increase people's living standards. But I don't believe that's a realistic possibility in this society. It is, as Pam Frake from the Workers' Action Centre here has said, like expecting the government to provide the working class with an indefinite strike fund. And that's simply not going to happen. There isn't going to be that level of provision. If basic income is provided, it will have the adverse effects that I'm suggesting, and its level of adequacy will be subject to the same challenges as the present income support systems. And I think we fight on better terrain than fighting it out on the question of basic income.
And Floyd, if you wanted to respond to that, or some of the stuff from John's initial presentation, and then I have a question for you as well.
Yeah, I think the CERB has underscored the need for a basic income. Effectively, it was an automatic stabilizer that was brought in a rush, it was 3 months, I recall, by the time it finally rolled in, which is like light speed in government time. And imagine if we already had a basic income before that. Imagine if people could have made choices on their own without those stresses, without all that chaos. I mean, the pandemic was a sudden crisis that came quickly, but people have personal crises all the time where they're in need of some means of helping them through a transition. And there's nothing out for them right now for the average person. So I think CERB showed how a basic income can work. And in fact, it's been shown that it is responsible for a significant increase in the disposable income for the bottom third of Canadians. I don't know of any other program that's accomplished that. So that's on CERB. I guess some other common criticisms of it is that it kept people from working. People didn't want to go to work. That's actually not true. It's only anecdotal. The stats in aggregate show that most people did go back to work even during CERB, even when their jobs paid less than CERB. So those who didn't go back, maybe they just had crappy jobs and they just wanted to hold out a bit longer, or maybe they had some personal reason why they weren't ready to go back. There are also stories of the opposite. People who went back to work for free because they had CERB and they wanted to help their small business employers not go out of business. Like there are heartwarming stories like that too, but all we hear about is the anecdotes that people didn't go back to work because CERB paid them more, which is only anecdotal. So yeah, some interesting points. First of all, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Mr. Clarke and your background, sir, and what you're doing to make life better here in Canada. A few things I want to respond to. Yeah, it's quite frightening to see the impact of Milton Friedman's generation on social assistance. But I think things have actually moved a bit beyond that, beyond this notion of income support. I think we're now in an era of income supplementation, and frankly, it's the only thing that's worked. So let's look at a few examples. There's a basic income program in Manitoba called Manitoba Rent Assist. It's structured like a basic income. It is not disincentivized work. It helps people pay their rent. It's very easy to use. You just fill out a few forms and you can get extra cash for your rent. It works. It hasn't jacked up rental costs of rent either for landlords. The largest basic income in the whole world is actually in Canada. It's called the Canada Child Benefit. Over 1 million families are getting over $600 a month. I believe it was over 400,000 families are getting more than $1,000 a month right now. This program, so a number of economists are fond of saying that after taxes, that actually income inequality has gone down in this country, which I find a preposterous statement. But what they're leaving out of that sentence is after taxes and transfers. And the number one transfer that has actually reduced income inequality and reduced the amount of poverty in this country by, I think it's like 30%, is the Canada Child Benefit, a basic income. So basic income is the only thing that's worked. So why are we still talking about the same old broken systems that haven't worked? So that's on that point. It's the only thing that's actually worked to reduce poverty. It hasn't created a work disincentive. It's actually grown the economy. In a few years after the Liberal government put the CCB in place, increasing the payments to lower-income households from what was there prior to that from the Conservatives. GDP in this country was leading the G7 for 2 years. And Stephen Pelosi, who was the Bank of Canada governor at the time, said that this GDP growth is driven in large part by the Canada Child Benefit. So again, the topic of this webinar was economic recovery. So I'm just underscoring that. In Alaska, they share oil revenues with their citizens. Typical average check once a year is $2,000. It hasn't decreased. Full-time employment, it's actually increased part-time employment as people, I guess, have had the means to go out and seek part-time work and can make it work, maybe second earners. Second, I find it always kind of curious that people from the pure anti-poverty background want to construct this or that narrative. It's not basic income or social assistance. It's not basic income or public transport. Why not both? If we had a basic income, you could build all the other social assistance programs on top of it. It would be cheaper, more effective, less stigma-inducing, and less disincentivizing to work to do it that way. I'll tell you, a lot of people that I know, especially one person in particular on ODSP, would much rather have 2/3 of their cash come from a basic income that has no conditions, and the rest of it come from ODSP for extra supplementation. Why not treat people consistently and give extra support where it's needed? So I don't buy this argument that it's this or that. I do think basic income is a permanent strike fund for Canadians, and in fact, it's been shown to actually do that. We've seen examples in Stockton, California recently, where people were able to were twice as likely to seek higher paying jobs who had basic incomes in that pilot than those who didn't. There's anecdotal stories in the Ontario pilot that was happening. Perhaps the biggest difference, again, between basic income and other social assistance programs is that you're actually helping everyone. You're helping people who are uncompensated right now, like mothers, caregivers, students, and entrepreneurs. These people don't generally fit the tests of poverty, but they need money. And I think it's time that we started compensating for uncompensated work. So I do see it as a strike fund, and I don't see it at all as a supplement for corporate wages. In fact, a basic income with a higher minimum wage would be a great idea, because the higher minimum wage continues to increase incentives to work for those who are earning around that level. There's no reason it should be one or the other. There's no reason why we shouldn't have pharmacare and basic income. And and unfortunately, I guess, sorry, the last thing that Mr. Clarke said, that I don't think we must be reconciled to a low-wage economy with the basic income. Well, frankly, that's where we're headed. Automation is doing that. We're doing more with less. I don't know what's going to change that. Most of the new jobs being projected to be created are lower income and lower wage, and billions of people who can compete for those same jobs online around the world are coming online soon. I just think, structurally speaking, we have no choice but to pursue a future where we have a basic income to supplement labor income so that people can enjoy a middle-class lifestyle. How else are we going to do it? Like the economy, we are not creating middle-income jobs. I don't think we can raise the minimum wage up to the middle-class levels. Like, that's not what it's designed for. So we do need some sort of labor supplement to share in the gains from technology, so it doesn't all go to the 1%, and we can all prosper together. Now, I understand Mr. Clarke's reticence. He's seen a lot of cutting in his time, and I understand that. And I think things are different now. But famous last words, right?
Yeah, that ties nicely, and we're going to turn to the audience questions for the last 30 minutes or so. So I ask you to be as quick as you can, and I'll let John jump in as well, and we'll go to the Q&A. But I would suggest a little contradiction in what you said is that you can have a higher minimum wage and the UBI together, but you're also articulating a view that we're in this sort of inevitable downward trend for wages and a low-wage economy. And there, aren't you sort of attributing technological change and trends in automation to what are really, again, that idea of balance of forces between the classes that own things and the classes that work? Because, there were social scientists in the 19th century, like Marx, for example, who thought wages of workers were just going to continually deteriorate. The immiseration of the working class was sort of inevitable. But as you saw, once union formed and different movements happened in the 20th century, wages increased and concessions were granted to workers. And then in the Great Depression, you had, extreme poverty, extreme economic dislocation and unemployment. And then in the post-war period, because unions were stronger and there was sort of a Cold War compromise with the unions, you had that 30 years of relatively high wages and relative social equality, economic equality. So I guess the question is, isn't there a danger in articulating the UBI that way, that you're kind of accepting this imbalance in power and these low wages that don't have to, this low wage economy that doesn't have to stay that way?
Mm-hmm.
All the examples you gave were before the advent of computing and robotics, were when you needed people to produce things in line with economic growth. We were entering a zero marginal cost future where the cost to add new units in production is literally zero for a lot of companies right now. People just aren't needed as much. And we should be embracing this future, finding a way that we can all benefit from it, enjoy the promises of John Maynard Keynes, who said that by now we should have 15-hour work weeks. How are we going to do that without a basic income? It's not possible. We can't regulate a 15-hour work week. People should have the choice to do that. Yeah, maybe. So I also think, again, it's all of the above. Why not also strengthen unions? Why not do all these things? But basic income will also help those who fall outside the scope of labor law, like mothers, caregivers, students, people who need this extra support.
Okay.
All right, John, you want to jump in there, and then we're getting lots of questions
I mean,
now.
let me just say, I don't accept the notion that there's this grisly future that's going to be set by the robots. We're going to be living in a situation where everyone would be living in dire poverty were it not for this injection of basic income that's somehow going to put things right. First of all, that's not going to happen. We're not going to get that. The Silicon Valley billionaires, if there's a basic income provided, they're not going to be paying for it. It's going to come out of the taxes of somewhat better paid workers who are, according to this vision, disappearing anyway. But I just want to pick up on the fact that I don't think we can rule out the possibility of a 15-hour work week where everybody makes a decent standard of living. If that amount of social wealth is being produced, then why shouldn't there be a 15-hour work week? And it doesn't have to be a question of trying to conceal the horrors with a basic income. Elon Musk is very, very big on this idea that the robots are going to completely take over. But at the end of the day, everybody's going to be reduced to a situation of living outside of the workforce with no possibility of participating. But the robot wealth is going to create enough, it's going to generate something that can be provided to people in the form of a basic income. Well, I have a better idea. Why don't we take the robots away from Elon Musk? And why don't we subject those robots to a rational and just plan to how society should be organized and ensure that the working day is very, very short, but the social wealth is shared? It's the billionaires, some of them basic income fans like basic income, like Elon Musk, who are in the way. And I don't think we need basic income to achieve social justice. We just need a very, very different kind of society.
Okay,
well, we're working for the same goals, just different ways.
let's jump into some of the Q&A we have here, and I'll just try to bundle things together when that makes sense. So Mark Lister asks, a labor activist here in BC, asks, what is your opinion on, I think this is directed at Floyd, what is your opinion on full employment, and how does UBI fit into that framework? Do you think full employment is a desirable goal in this?
Well, I think we kind of already reached full employment pre-COVID, and it didn't really help. Wages were still stagnant on the low end and at the middle. So, and that took 12 years to get there since the last recovery, the last crisis. How long is it going to take next time to get back to pre levels? How long are we going to wait? We can do a basic income now and give people a chance, a share of the economy, give people a chance to aspire to something better. Gosh, there's a point that that John made previously I want to respond to. Oh, I forgot now. I'll try and come back to it. But yeah, I mean, full employment, we've already been there. It's not making a big difference on wages. And oh yeah, I remember now. So there's also a bit of a tragedy that gets lost in these debates about automation and impact on wages and what's going to happen. Well, the tragedy is that we get stuck in these aggregate statistics. These techno-optimists say, oh yeah, but eventually, every industrial revolution leads to more jobs and such. Yeah, but what about the people who've suffered on the way there? You want to see the impact of automation on destroying jobs, just go to Hamilton, go to Oshawa. The GM shut down its plants, and they said it's because we're retooling for self-driving electric cars. Retooling means automating with less people working there. Recently, I think it was Heinz brought ketchup production back to Canada, to Quebec from the US, and created where they can create 65 million gallons of ketchup a year with a grand total of new jobs of 20 people at that factory. This is what we're dealing with, people. Go to Hamilton and see the impacts of the loss of our manufacturing sector. And of those 4 million jobs, Andrew Yang was saying that half of those people didn't go back to work, and the other half of that half went on disability payments and most of them never got back off. So there is significant loss of significant suffering for the people who have been affected by automation and globalization. And I don't see how higher wages would change what happens to those people. You're driven through unions. I don't see how welfare programs will help. I think people need an adequate basic income to help them who are displaced, and help them seek better work, better futures, because they have long-term security. And there is no social program designed, to my knowledge, in Canada or anywhere in the world right now that provides long-term income security in an unconditional manner, allowing people to aspire to greater potential in their life.
Okay, John, I'll let you jump in, but as well, if either of you could comment on, we have a question from Nick Taylor about the recent report. I guess it was filed in 2020 by the BC Expert Panel on Basic Income. So this was initiated by the Social Democratic government, the NDP government here. Just wondering if either of you had comments on that. And John, feel free to take the earlier question as well about full employment.
And I have to apologise for the fact that I haven't had the opportunity to examine the BC study yet, for which I apologise. I'm not able to.
Yeah, no problem. You're both back east, so if you haven't paid attention to that BC report in particular, no worries.
It's certainly on my list, but I'm afraid I just haven't got to it. So again, I mean, there is an assumption that automation is inherently dreadful, and we're going to conceal the effects by introducing this basic income that is going to be, as I say, not provided by Elon Musk, not provided by the tech billionaires, is going to come out of the wages of other working people. But that gets me back to, I'm very much taken with your balance of forces theory there, Derek. I think it really speaks to the question, because with a balance of forces that goes in the right way, that's based on the rejuvenation of trade unions, based on social movements, based on us having real strength, I believe we can push back. We can push back in the short term. We can push back against the effects of technological displacement. We can demand reduced working days. But ultimately, it's only under a system in which the robots are owned by Elon Musk that automation is inherently a bad thing. It's not inherently a bad thing that we can produce. Well, I don't know if making ketchup is our priority, but it's not inherently a bad thing that the productivity of human labor is so increased by automation that it opens up incredible possibilities. Provided that technology is used in a sustainable and rational way, it's potentially an enormously good thing. But it's precisely in a situation where that technology is used to displace workers, to abandon people, that it becomes bad, and that's what we've got to challenge. And we're not going to be able to conceal it with a basic income that we hope somehow is going to be adequate. It's going to come down to a real struggle in society. We're going to have to take up a struggle against those vested interests, and we're going to have to fight for a very different kind of society. But I don't think the route of the future is a robot future with nothing for human beings to do except live on a basic income. I think we can build a society in which we utilize that technology in ways that are really important, and ways that make a real difference.
I think Samir's going to jump in, and I was going to go to a question next that deals with post-secondary. So this is a good time, but go ahead, Samir.
Yeah, well, thanks, Derek. Thank you both for such a fascinating discussion so far. I'd like to ask a question of each of you. First, John, very interesting presentation. I wonder, though, if there isn't, and Derek was pointing to this as well, but I want to try and just, really try and put my finger on something in your presentation that I think is somewhat contradictory, at least the way I heard it. In your history of social provisioning, going back to Elizabethan times, it does very much seem like something that's sort of top down, and it misses or at least I didn't hear this, the aspect of social struggle that working people engaged in order to secure better working conditions, a larger share of the social product, the reduction in the length of the working day, and so on. And so I think that in a way then sets up a bit of ambivalence in terms of, on the one hand, saying that, well, it's not predetermined what technology can or cannot do, how socially sustainable it is, and so on. Is it going to serve human ends, or is it going to be placed in the service of profit and extraction of surplus value? So I'm wondering if that could be clarified somewhat, insofar as we could actually say, look, rather than the sort of the middle class subsidizing UBI, this could be something that we could look to generate. So we could generate the funding for this from something like what Thomas Piketty calls for, which is to say a kind of punitive wealth tax, right? Obviously, the balance of forces here probably not looking too favorable when you're going up against, the Elon Musks and Jeff Bezos of this world. However, we did see a victory recently. I mean, just last day or so, right? With the fan pushback against this so-called Super League. And this was something of a victory, at least on the part of the English clubs, whose fan base said, no, we want no part of this. Right? This is something that we absolutely reject. And in fact, it's the fan base that built these clubs up to begin with, right? And we do not want this. And so the owners walked it back. And I think this is interesting, right? Football clubs are extremely powerful. The owners are extremely powerful, yet they yielded to their fans. So I think this is something to keep in mind. Floyd, I mean, I think your presentation was a fascinating one, but I do share John's worry in terms, and it does have a similar sort of dimension, which is to say a dimension of agency, and you mentioned freedom, but there's a sort of sense of freedom from want, freedom from conditionality. But surely we also want to think in larger terms about freedom too, to determine one's life, right? And if we're living in the context in which corporations have inordinate power over us still, having a basic income, having income supplements, top-ups, wage top-ups, and so on seems somewhat paltry. Surely we should be aiming for something a little bit more robust, in terms of our social vision. So those are a couple of questions that I had for you both.
Okay, if you want me to go first, I thank you, Samir, for the question, because I think what you've uncovered is a deficiency in my presentation rather than in my intent, because precisely the dawn of social provision of income support systems was certainly not just some action from on high. It actually did reflect. It reflected a very naked and a very brutal class struggle that was going on within England at the time. So yes, they provided income support because it was Lawrence Stone who said that the Tudors' greatest achievement was the creation of a royal monopoly on violence. And so, yes, they used that centralized power to try to terrorize people who they had displaced from their land holdings into the new workforces, and people resisted. And so the poor laws, as punitive as they were implemented precisely because of the level of unrest that they couldn't contain. And indeed, then a 2.5 century struggle broke out over whether people would receive indoor or outdoor relief, whether they would have to go into the workhouses or whether they could receive relief outside. And that was a huge struggle that took place. And income support systems have always been a reflection of that struggle, even if it's been relatively atomized and low level, and sometimes it hasn't been. In 29, R.B. Bennett, the Prime Minister, met with a delegation of Canadian unemployed workers, and when unemployment insurance was proposed, said, never will I or any government I'm part of put a premium on idleness. And yet he tabled a bill for the introduction of unemployment insurance, and it wasn't because he became a humanitarian, it was because of the organized resistance that took place. So today, when we look at questions of income support and social provision, it is precisely Derek's balance of forces in society that's going to determine it. I simply make the point, however, that while the balance of forces decides, it's sometimes not a good idea to charge uphill. And I think trying to fight for an extended commodification of social provision is a mistake. Certainly, there is a need for robust income support programs of various kinds. Absolutely, there is. But to extend that cash payment as the normal form of receiving social programs, I think is a mistake. I think we would do much more, to use the concrete example, to fight for an extension of social housing. And I come from the UK, and I'm old enough to remember a time when council housing was a mainstream part of working class life. It wasn't a system just for the poorest people. And that makes such a difference in people's lives. And Thatcher targeted it for very good reasons. But building a complex system of social infrastructure that's complex and durable is the priority I think we should put ourselves into, and not the extension of the cash payment.
There's a lot there. Thank you, John. And Floyd, do you want to have a turn there on some of the points Samir raised? And then we'll want to get one or two more audience questions as well.
Yeah, just rewinding a bit more. Again, I'm not saying, and nobody's, most basic income activists are not saying that we'll have a future of no jobs with robots doing all the work, but rather what we'll see an extension of what we've already been seeing is a decline in middle class work as robots and software do more of that work, and an increase of a two-tiered system effectively of lower income, lower quality jobs and very skilled higher income jobs. I think we're already, and we've been trending to lower income and lower quality jobs. The share of jobs that are lower pay is increasing, and that is a structural issue. It's been happening for decades. So I think another thing that I find kind of curious is also how a lot of the mainstream economics models, things economists say, also things that Mr. Clarke is saying with regards to unions seems to imply as if we're not in a globalized economy. Absolutely, we should raise incomes. Absolutely, we should create countervailing forces, Derek, as you're saying, to improve labor rights and to improve pay. But that'll mostly help jobs that are not movable. What about all the other jobs? As I mentioned earlier in this talk, Andy Stern, who's president of the SEIU union, said that unions are losing out to globalization and to automation, losing leverage. An SF Federal Reserve paper showed how increasing automation makes unions lose bargaining power. This is happening. It's not happening because of Elon Musk's agenda. It's happening because of the technology that's all around there. It's impacting the ability for bargaining power for unions overall. So we're moving into a future where more and more jobs are doing our knowledge economy jobs, people sitting behind Zoom screens like right now, and those jobs are very, very easy to take offshore or anywhere else. So I'm just saying that, yes, we should raise wages locally, but it's not going to be a panacea for all sectors of the economy. I think we also need a basic income to provide people with income security so they can pursue better jobs that are local or not movable and pursue better futures in that way. And to Samir's point, aren't there more important things to look at? Sure, but this is a talk about basic income. I'm with Benjamin Tal from CIBC, who says basic income must be the first thing we do, immediate relief, immediately buying time for people to be able to participate more fully in their economy, and as a first step towards tackling the dramatic wealth inequality that we're experiencing, so people have hope and have confidence. And another thing I just don't understand why people in the anti-poverty movement don't acknowledge is that if people are not insecure, they're more likely to vote for progressive things. They're more likely to participate in protests. They're more likely to get politically involved because they're not worried about how they're going to eat the next day. So why don't we do a basic income so people can think more long-term and more progressive, and then we can get all the other things that we've been trying to get and failing to get for many, many decades. It's time to do something new.
Okay, let's turn to this question about the post-secondary. It's from an anonymous attendee. With the rise of automation causing people to lose jobs, it would seem that higher education graduates would be in higher demand. However, in my experience, many university graduates have difficulty getting work in their area of expertise. Instead, they often find employment in the service sectors while being weighed down by student loans. Would redirecting funding from supporting as many students as possible at post-secondary institutions to creating a basic income for all be more beneficial for enabling economic equality? And I think that gets to the point of what is the future of the university and post-secondary education in a world where everyone has a UBI, but maybe that's still far too low for you to attend university. And also this notion of, I think the public funding of universities raises the question of what we value as jobs and what we value as fields of study. And are they, and this is the Institute of Humanities. So we know humanities have been under attack. The budgets of these departments across the country have been under attack. We had the thing with Laurentian University being cut back entirely. So what is the future of post-secondary education as part of this argument, I guess? And what is product?
Again,
what is
I also,
the post-secondary in an automated world?
I often find, again, people are trying to create if-or comparisons. No one in their right mind would suggest defunding universities to fund the basic income. UBI Works right now is working on a funding proposal for a guaranteed minimum income that won't cost middle income workers anything, and will mostly come from ending tax breaks that affect the wealthiest and various business sectors that don't contribute to productivity. More on that coming probably in a month or two. So there's no reason to assume that basic income should be paid on the backs of middle income workers. That would be terrible. That's why I don't support many of the proposals put out by my colleagues in other organizations or from the PBO recently that for example, suggested rolling back the basic personal amounts, a very important tax credit to pay for basic income, because then you're basically costing middle income workers to pay for poverty. And I just don't think that's productive. And but about universities, again, this is not really about basic income, but I will share some bad news. Canada is the #1 country in the world in terms of education, and also #1 in terms of educated people living in poverty. I believe we're in a period of excess labor supply, in large part due to automation and globalization, which is why the phenomenon of de-skilling has been documented by labor economists, where university-educated people are taking jobs, the only jobs they can find that used to be done by high school educated people. They're taking what they can, and it's lower income work, because that's structurally where the economy is going. And then high school educated people are taking even lower paid work and competing with each other for what's left, and in many cases not even going into the job market because there's very little hope. People have no idea how bad things have gotten with the way the economy is going. That's why I think basic income is urgent as a way to give people long-term income security so they can fight for better opportunity and better potential for their lives. And I don't think the social assistance system is designed for the type of structural changes to the labor market that we are already in. The fourth industrial revolution is already here. We're already halfway through it. No one's talking about it.
Okay, I'm going to just ask 2 more questions here and then let you both respond to them and sort of make closing remarks, just because these 2 questions touch on things we haven't really gotten into. The first is from Alan Cooper. What do you think of the potential for acknowledging a universal fair income as part of a genuine plan for the redistribution of capital? In other words, funding it by taxing extreme incomes, including inheritances and other gifts. I assume that's getting at other forms of wealth that is passed on, inherited wealth. And then Nick Taylor has a question that gets to the question of housing, which we just touched on a little bit, but here in Vancouver, we should really always talk about housing when we talk about income, because the market is so out of control. So Stats Canada says 1/3 of the population pays rent, 1/3 pays a mortgage, and 1/3 pays neither. So the huge inequalities there. How do we structure direct income payments to avoid directly subsidizing capital through rent and mortgage interest? In other words, if we get the UBI here in Vancouver, an enormous percentage of that is going to go to rent and mortgage payments. So yeah, the question of housing and the question of wealth taxes, I guess, and then anything else you both wanted to add in terms of summarizing thoughts. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll say first of all, I totally favour everything that can possibly be done to tax the rich and to increase the burden of taxation that's placed on personally wealthy, on corporations and on banks. But once that has been achieved, and to the extent it's been achieved, I do remain of the position that the best investment that we can put is into strengthening the social infrastructure rather than putting it into a reworked income support system that, for the most part, provides a wage subsidy to low-wage employers. So I'm not in favour of using those funds in that way. With regards to housing, I think we are in an absolutely out of control situation. People use the term the neoliberal city, and I think that's what's been created. And we have an extreme commodification of housing. And the pushback on that in immediate terms does lie, I think, in a real fight for one of the most key questions is a real fight for a massive extension of the social housing sector. And I don't mean, token gestures, and I don't mean developers who build condos with a few affordable units in them that are not really affordable. I mean, really true large-scale social housing. Along with that, all kinds of push for all kinds of legislations and to limit that power of commodification, including strict rent controls and all other such measures that place a limit on that process. That's something that's absolutely essential. Just by way of a concluding comment, I think we're at a really pivotal moment. The Biden restoration and plans and hopes for a new Keynesian golden age and all the rest of it that are being put forward, I think are quite dubious. I think in this immediate situation, we're seeing an infusion of stimulatory spending of necessity. But I don't think the crisis is over. I don't think the health crisis is over, and I don't think the underlying economic crisis is over. And I think who pays for that crisis is going to be something that comes back to your Derek's balance of forces. And I think there's an urgent need to strengthen that balance of forces. One of the dangers, the greatest danger I see with basic income that didn't come up is not whether it's actually going to be implemented in the near future, but whether it becomes for our movements the main generalized demand. Whether we put the time and effort into making that our main focus. And I think that will be a very, very big mistake. I think there are so much more important fights that we need to take up. And I would even say to people who support basic income, can we even agree to disagree on that? Can we recognize that the fight for things like housing, pharmacare, dentacare, these things that we can unite on and fight for right now? Because in the period ahead, we face enormous attacks, and the need for a counterattack in a way and on a scale we haven't seen for decades is absolutely fundamentally necessary. So that, I think, is what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, John. And Floyd, if you can tackle those two and any concluding remarks in just 3-4 minutes here as we come up on time. We really appreciate this discussion today.
Okay. Yeah, I also favor taxes on inheritances and taxes that primarily target the top 5% of earners. We're working on such a plan right now that I would argue is a centrist plan that hopefully we should have out within a month or two. The housing question is interesting. There's this thought that giving people more money, particularly at the bottom, means it'll all go to landlords. Well, you could say the same thing about minimum wage. You could say some things about getting a raise. Have these things risen the costs of rent? No. Has the Canada Child Benefit, a basic income, risen rent? No. Has the Manitoba Rent Assist, which is a basic income in Manitoba, increased the costs of rent? They haven't. Rents go up due to other factors, just like housing market goes up due to other factors. So the presence of a basic income doesn't mean that we should not also be pursuing all the ideas John just mentioned to increase housing supply. And I think, among other things, we should also be looking at changing the rules by which banks can create credit, because there's a credit market and there's a housing market. And even just today, the central bank in Canada acknowledged that we actually don't have what's driving prices right now is actually not supply, it's demand. And where does demand come from? It comes from the credit market, where banks can create infinite amounts of credit and fuel speculators. So we need to do something about speculation. And all these things are unrelated, in my point of view, to basic income. But basic income doesn't solve every problem, but it makes every problem a little easier to solve. So I reject this idea that this notion of we must stop all of the demands and focus on basic income. No, I mean the parties will coalesce and run on whatever platforms they think voters will vote for. And I'm working towards making sure basic income is a key election issue, not at the expense of another issue, but having it as an issue. And I think again, if we have a basic income, people will have the security to be more progressive about everything else that we want to do. And I'd rather choose ending poverty than dental care or things like that are, I think, very piecemeal changes to the fabric of social life than actually literally ending poverty through cash right now that people can use to pay for whatever they need, whether it's debts or going to school or anything that they might need.
Thank you, Floyd. And we're going to turn it over to Samir for concluding remarks. And again, thank you both for staying with us till 9 p.m. back east there. It's much appreciated. And this session, someone asked, this session was recorded along with the other Institute sessions will be posted on the website and YouTube. So we hope it'll reach a much wider audience than those who were able to join us tonight.
Yeah, well, thank you, Derek. I'd like to just thank our panelists, Floyd Marinescu and John Clarke, for their terrific, insightful presentations this evening. It's often said that we don't benefit anymore really from fairly sharply differing views on of the same topic or subject, but I beg to differ. I think this was really helpful in terms of just outlining the two rather defined perspectives on the question of UBI. So thank you very much. Thank you for all of your questions. Thanks for being here to the attendees. Excellent questions and comments. Really appreciate them. And thank you, Derek, under difficult circumstances for moderating. I really appreciate that. I've just posted the event that's coming up on Friday in the chat section, and then also look at registering for the event on Monday on the Indian Farmers Strike. Last couple of words of thanks and acknowledgement to Devin Gillen, who's our videographer, so to speak, and also to Huyen Pham, who's not here, but she does all the crucial logistical work behind the scenes to put things like this together, and always appreciate her excellent and very hard work and devotion to the Institute. So thank you very much, and have a great evening, and we will see you again. Bye.
Thank you.